Okay, let's sing. Joey, here, cool bandana. Oh, sing with me, Joey, sing with me, Joey, sing with me, what a pretty song. That was so good. Hi. So I am going to be filming my June wrap-up in a totally different way than I have ever filmed any wrap-ups before. It's currently June 12th, and I have 13 books that I have finished so far, but I want to pack them because I have finished them, and today is the day that I am packing all the books. And I want to pack these just to get them out of the way, but I won't be able to unpack them for my wrap-up. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to film a wrap-up of these 12 books and then pack them. And then as I finish the other books on my TBR, which you can kind of see on the top shelf there of the now empty trolley cart, as I finish those, I will pack them. And but before I do, I will film a quick little pulling of a question and answering of that question. So this may be one of the best or worst wrap-ups I ever do. We will see. I do not plan on doing this method in the future. This is just kind of a workaround for me and for my mental health in the midst of the utter chaos that I currently sit in. Let's grab the questions. Actually, the questions are back there. Let me go grab them. Oh no. A pile of papers is falling over. Whose idea was it to move? Whose idea? Teacup questions in hand, 12 books in front of me. I'm going to start with the 4 books that I have currently completed for the Library versus Library Challenge. I'm having so much fun with it. From the start, I have decided to read 2 books at a time for that challenge. One is from my county library and one is from my city library. And I've finished 2 sets of those. So the first book I read from my county library was Miss Benson's Beetle. Loved it so much, did some annotating on it, truly loved this book. Was it a great summer read? Absolutely. Was it life-affirming? Did it restore my faith in humanity? Absolutely. Was it feel good? Absolutely. This is probably one of my favorite books of the year thus far, if not my favorite book of the year. I adore this book. Let's go ahead and answer a question about it. Let's see. Which location in the book would you most like to visit and why? All right, so in this book, you have an older teacher who loses it. One day, she just loses it. When she's young, she has an interest in science. She is particularly interested in insects and in beetles. And there is a beetle that she believes exists that nobody has ever cataloged. And she wants to do this, right? But she ends up becoming a teacher. It sounds like her students don't respect anybody, not as a whole class anyway, but I feel for her, and she loses it one day. And that's kind of the impetus that she needs to actually take the trip to go and find this beetle. And doing that takes her to New Caledonia, which is an island off the coast of Australia. And so she goes to New Caledonia. She goes to a couple of other places too. I have to say, I probably wouldn't really want to visit any of the places that she visits. I'm not a big tropical climate kind of person. So maybe London would be the place that I would want to go, which is where the story starts. Read this book. I'm now going to pack it. in the box that's sitting right next to me. Reading from my city library recommendation stack was Rosewater. Rosewater by, I believe I introduced their name as Tade Thompson before, but I believe it's Tade Thompson. Tade Thompson is a practicing psychologist and counselor in London who happens to write sci-fi fiction on the side. And this was a great book. I truly enjoyed this. This was I think I said in my review, it was the singularly most sci-fi science fiction book I've ever read. This was something that I never would have picked up on my own, ever, ever, ever. And it was something that truly I thought I would DNF as I went into it. I did not anticipate really enjoying this book, but I did. Was it life-affirming? Did it restore my faith in humanity? Not at all. Was it a good summer read? I mean, I think that's really taste dependent. For me, it's not something that I would consider a summer read. I think that this would be a great fall read. I would like to read the next book in this trilogy in October because it does really feel like a fall kind of spooky read to me. Was it feel good? Not at all. Not at all. This book is full of trigger warning things. If you are a sensitive reader, this is not going to be the book for you. There are aliens that are taking over and nobody is who they seem to be. And there's like a whole dream sphere. It is absolutely fascinating. And I truly love this author's writing style and the way that they weave in things that kind of ground all of this extraterrestrial storyline in earthly humanity. And I think that by the end of the trilogy, it might be life-affirming, but I can't be sure. And definitely at this point, at where this book ends, this installment in the trilogy ends, it is definitely not. But I truly loved this book. For purposes of the book alone, I would say it was an excellent read. For the purposes of our library versus library, I would have to say it did not fit the bill. But let's go ahead and answer a question. What wonder of the world comes to mind when you think about this book? Basic premise, you have this guy who is a sensitive. It takes place in Nigeria. And you have this guy who is a sensitive, which there's like fungal matter that's growing on things, people, that communicates thoughts and feelings and memories and ideas. And so everybody has a reaction or a response to those things that are in the environment now. But there's like a spray you can use to kind of protect yourself from the fungal matter. In addition to that, like normal kind of conduction of thoughts, ideas, and emotions among the people who you're around, this man is also a sensitive. And the whole premise of the story is that these sensitives who can tap into this outer realm that allows them to enter the thoughts, minds, and memories of other people at will, but also to be tapped by others, which is a danger. These sensitives are suddenly dying and being targeted, and by who or what, nobody really knows. They seem to be dying from some kind of illness or disease, but it also could be like an assassination, a mass assassination of the sensitives. And so you have this sensitive who is living in this place, which is the epicenter of the invasion. So there's this dome in the center of this place where a city has grown up around it, because first it was just a bunch of very poor, kind of homeless people. Then the dome came, which houses some alien life form. And then the alien life form, or the dome, started healing people of different illnesses, both mental and physical. And so people started to come and wait for the moments when the dome would open and that healing was a possibility. So a city grew up around it. He's been here since the very beginning, and he's been sensitive since the very beginning. And he's not sick yet, but he's part of the group of people trying to figure out why people are dying, disappearing, what's going on. Like, there's all sorts of stuff going on. It's kind of like Afrofuturism noir, extraterrestrial Afrofuturism noir. And that dome, to get back to the question, what wonder of the world does this remind me of? I think with the Africa setting and the dome focus, I think it mostly reminds me of the pyramids. This is a great read. It truly is a great read. The next book that I read from my list from my county librarian was How the Penguins Saved Veronica by Hazel Pryor. Let's pull. Did the book strike you as original? I haven't thought about that. Basic premise of the book is that there's this crotchety old woman who doesn't feel like she has any family, has a private investigator locate a grandson. She had a child who was adopted out. She did not raise her son. Later, she wanted to know about her son. She did learn some things, but by the time she knew who he was, like in the world, he had passed away. And she believed that he didn't have any children. But then she decides to look just one more time because she's going to die and leave quite a substantial amount of money that nobody will inherit. And so she does find that she has a grandson. She goes to meet the grandson, but doesn't like him. He's going through a hard time. He's going through a recent breakup. He smokes some marijuana in front of her, and she just kind of dismisses him and writes him off and decides that she's going to be inspired by a TV show that she saw, kind of like a Richard Attenborough kind of nature program, all about the Adélie penguins in Antarctica. And she's going to go to Antarctica and meet these scientists that are featured in this program. And if she likes what she sees there, then she's going to leave them the money. She's not invited, but she decides she's going anyway. They purposefully, clearly communicate to her that there will be no place for her. They will not take care of her. She cannot come. And then she shows up. And the story goes on from there. I truly loved this story by the end. I loved the premise from the very beginning. I was really enjoying myself until they started switching perspectives in a weird pattern. The characters are not super likable through most of the book. You do come to like them, and they're not likable for the majority of the book. Even if their behavior is understandable, it doesn't make them likable. So to have the frequency and the kind of wackiness of the way that it goes back and forth between multiple different perspectives was really jarring, and I don't feel like it was done well. I don't feel like it was original. I think the story is fairly original, although the grumpy, crotchety older person having a past and learning to love is not very original. So maybe no. And also the not dual timelines, although there is kind of that. There's a lot of flashbacks. So no, I don't think original. Was it feel good? Absolutely. Was it a great summer read? Absolutely. Did it restore my faith in humanity? Is it life affirming? Yeah, I guess, kind of. But it took such a long time to like anybody. For me, it was missing something. And then for my last completed book so far, my second read from my city library recommendation was Housekeeping. This is a conundrum for me. Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson. I'm going to pull the question and then see where we go from there. What feedback would you give the author is my question. Beautiful writing. Just gorgeous writing. This is basically a coming of age, I would call it a novella. It's probably a little longer than a novella, but it's not quite a novel, told about two sisters who are constantly going through loss. So it's about impermanence. It is about the reality that people will let you down, people will hurt you, and there's really nobody who you can rely on. Not even really yourself. You will let yourself down. But the language in it is so beautifully rich, and the pacing is so perfect that it feels like such a gentle story. It feels so feel good, to the point where you actually, like, I was actually reading back whole pages because it was like, did that person just kill themselves? Yes, they did, but it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever read. Did it restore my faith in humanity? No, it really didn't. Although possibly it could, I suppose, for someone else. I found the subject matter really hard to read about, to be honest. I enjoyed reading it because it was so beautiful, and I hated reading it because it was so sad. Although it did feel good to read it. Yeah, I'm torn about this one. I'm torn. On its own, I would say this is an excellent read. It's not necessarily the read for me, but it is an excellent read, and I can think of many people that I would recommend this book to. I do not plan on reading any more Marilynne Robinson. It is very much what I thought it was going into it. I don't think it hit the mark for my request for summer reading. But I finished. Peace Bunny Island. This was a delight to read. It was a little plodding at times, but I'm so happy that I know about this organization, about this boy, about this family that supported this boy in creating the capability for people to have access to bunnies for mental health, but also saving so many bunnies, saving them from lives of despair. It's a beautiful book. I don't think there was enough information there to truly fill that book. So again, it was a little plodding for a read at times, but the concept and knowing its reality is beautiful. And then there is I Belong Here, A Journey Along the Backbone of Britain by Anita Setby. And this was phenomenal. This is a social justice travel book about a particular woman's experiences in England and finding place there amidst horrifying racial crime. It was acted out against her. So this is a first-person experience, first-person account. So it is a travel book, but it is also about social justice, and it's very much a pulling in as opposed to a shutting out kind of book. I highly recommend this, even though it is focused on the climate in the UK. I do think that there is a lot that all of us can learn from this voice. I Belong Here, A Journey Along the Backbone of Britain by Anita Setby is beautiful, beautiful book. And now I have several books that I read from my TBR that I will pull a question for. Let's talk about the Kingdoms. This was a rollover from my February TBR. It took me quite a long time to get to it, but I got to it and I loved it. So let's pull a question. How did it impact you? Do you think you'll remember it in a few months or years? I definitely think that I will remember this. This is a kind of a fantasy, magical realism, alternate space kind of a story. It's in the past, so it's historical fiction, except it's a past that exists because it assumes Napoleon won and England became a French colony and all things English have been outlawed. There's this person who it starts with a person on a train who has amnesia. They have no memory of who they are. And as things unfold for them, they start to understand that they're in a place that's not what they think it is. You, the reader, are also not sure what's going on. It's almost as if you have amnesia as well, because you understand things, but things are not what they should be. They're not as they are. And then there's time travel involved. Mary Kay Andrews The Homewreckers. I just finished this today. Did the problem of the book's plot get solved? That's a weirdly worded question, but yes, it did. So there is a mystery going on here. There is a woman who is having an affair with somebody. You don't know who. You meet her in the prologue at the beginning. She's having an affair with somebody and she gets attacked. And then you learn later that she disappeared. So then we that was the past. After the prologue, we go to present day, where you have two friends, two women who live in Savannah, who are house flippers. They buy houses, they redo them, and then they sell them for a profit. There is a man who works for like the equivalent of HGTV. There's a man who wants them to do a TV show for him, with him, let him produce it. But lots of different complications come along with that. They end up purchasing a house where they uncover a dead body. And all of these things kind of come together with a whole lot more, because it's also kind of a small town story. It's also a romance. It's just super fun. It's not believable at all, but it is a great, this is a great summer read. This is a lighthearted summer genre fiction kind of read, and I truly enjoyed it. I've never read anything by Mary Kay Andrews before. I'm not going to go out and read all their backlist. I didn't love it like that, but I truly had a fun time reading this, and I will definitely, the next time I'm getting on a plane or the next time I want something that's easy to read but is also involved enough to be actually interesting, I'll definitely reach for Mary Kay Andrews. This was super fun. And I can imagine rereading this too at some point. I really liked these main characters, and there's so much going on with all the intrigue and the little twists and turns and red herrings that I think it would be super fun to reread it. Even though I know the whodunit, I know the conclusion, I think that it'd be super fun to reread. So I really enjoyed this, and yes, the problem of the plot got solved. One of my two Mary Stewarts for the month, Rose Cottage by Mary Stewart. Oh, what 3 movies or TV shows come to mind when you think about this book? First thing that comes to mind is Murder, She Wrote. There's just kind of a small, but super impactful for the main character, but still kind of small mystery that needs to be solved. And I think, there's no like sleuth like Angela Lansbury kind of a character, but it reads with that kind of feeling to it. Then also I think that I might like a Jean Crane 1940s kind of movie, like a black and white kind of movie. There's a little mystery to it. Somebody's disappeared. I think Nancy Drew kind of feels like, I think the mystery element is what's the mystery, and then the kind of old-timey setting are what's standing out to me the most. So right now, I think maybe Nancy Drew, the book series, that's not TV or movies, but I'm going to go with that. So Nancy Drew, the vibe, as well as the vibe of Murder, She Wrote, as well as feel like so this is not the premise of this story at all, but there's an old movie, I can't remember what it's called. The Enchanted Cottage, I think is what it's called. So maybe the word cottage has reminded me of it. I think it's called The Enchanted Cottage. This couple, this kind of plain, not socially normed beauty, like this plain girl, and this man who's been injured in the war, physically injured, cosmetically injured in the war. They fall in love, and when they're in this cottage, they look on the outside like their souls are, like the people they are on the inside, which is absolutely beautiful and young and lovely. And then if they leave the cottage for a while, then they kind of deteriorate and become less socially acceptably beautiful. And so I think it is called The Enchanted Cottage. And that kind of reminds me of this, although that is not happening at all. There's no magical realism in this at all. Although they do try to trick you with maybe a little ghost story. Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree talk about similar stories. So this is a cozy fantasy. I do believe it's just been picked up. This was self-published, but I do believe that it was just picked up by a major publisher, and so it's going to get an overhaul, I think. But this was an absolute delight, just as it is. If you can get your hands on it now before it goes like public, I strongly suggest that you do that, because in this form, it is perfection. This is a slow, small town, comfy, feel-good read about a battling orc who retires to open a coffee shop or a bean juice shop in a town. The gnomes, she learned about coffee from the gnomes, but there are no gnomes around, and this town doesn't know coffee, has never heard of coffee, and she's going to open a coffee shop. And so there's little obstacles that happen, but they're all just delightful. And she's, retired from the battling life and wants something calm. Of course, there's a mob in the city, like a mafia, that she has to deal with. And there's a little romance, and there's just the cutest, calmest conversations about making coffee and selling coffee and adding cardamom to coffee. It's just so delightful. And plenty happens to keep the story moving forward, but ultimately this is character-driven, not plot-driven, and it just feels so good. I cannot think of another story that's actually like this story. I really can't. I read my Agatha Christie, A Pocket Full of Rye, which was very interesting. I didn't know anything about it going into it. And I loved the ending of this one so much. It made Miss Marple a real person for me. I loved it, as opposed to like a caricature of a sleuth. Did you race to the end, or was it more of a slow burn? So I think I mentioned this last time in my last wrap up, that I've learned, or maybe in my TBR, that I've learned that I get the most out of these when I read them in one sitting. It takes me, this was a little bit longer, but usually they take me about 2.5 hours to read them. And I really like that, because the characters stay fresh in my mind, and it's like watching a movie as opposed to trying to keep track of there's so many moving parts in an Agatha Christie, and I find that I don't really track with it if I read it in small parts. So the first 2 books in the Miss Marple series, I read like I normally read a book. I chunked out like 40 to 50 page sections to read each day that I wanted to read the book until I got to the date that I wanted to finish it on, which is how I read all my books, by the way. But it wasn't working for me as well as the one time on the 3rd book when I sat down on a Saturday morning to just read as much as I wanted, and ended up reading the whole thing in about 2.5 hours. And I realized at that point, that's the way that I need to read Agatha Christie. So that's the way that I read this. So was it a slow burn? I mean, you could make it a slow burn, sure. But I kind of raced to the end just because it doesn't feel like a race. I'm just reading at my normal speed, but like, I want to know what happens, and I want to get it in one sitting. So we've got Cold Comfort Farm, which was not on my TBR at all. I didn't even think about it. And then one day I just saw it sitting on the shelf, and I was like, ooh, I could really use some Cold Comfort Farm right now. So I pulled it off the shelf and started reading it, and then I had to finish it. It was a reread. I don't know how many times I've read this book. I love this book. It cracks me up every single time. I absolutely adore this book. If this book were a animal, what animal would it be? I think it's a golden retriever, because it just makes me happy. It just makes me happy. It's pretty goofy, but it can also get real serious. It's got some serious themes, but also really is just super goofy, and it just makes me happy, and it just wants to play ball. This book wants to play ball. And if you're not familiar with this book, very brief synopsis, super brief, because I don't want to ruin anything for you. If you've never read this book, you really need to. I believe it's written in the 1932. So it's a classic. It is about a socialite who is orphaned and needs a place to stay, doesn't want to get a job, wants to be supported. And so she contacts all of her family members saying, oh, poor me, look, I'm in this place and I would love to be able to come and visit you for an extended period of time, and gets invitations, and she's going to pick the most inviting invitation. She thinks she does that by picking Cold Comfort Farm, but she's in for a surprise. Last one. Every Heart a Doorway. This is not the last book that I will read this month, but it's the last one that I will review right now. And for the rest of the video, I don't know what I'm going to look like. I don't know what it's going to look like. But as I finish books moving forward in this video, I'm just going to record on the spot my question and response and then pack the book. How did the book make you feel? What emotions did it evoke? So I really wanted to love this because I know that everybody loves this. I read this as my, to fulfill the character, an asexual character prompt from the Read Harder challenge, and it does fulfill that. I didn't love this. It felt like it was trying too hard. It felt removed from me. I didn't care about the characters at all. I kind of really disliked them. I wasn't rooting for them one way or the other. You've got characters that want to get back to their world, and I just didn't care. And I don't know if it's the length of the book or if it's this author's writing. This is the first thing I've ever read by this author. It's the first book in this series. People go nuts for this series. I know they do. I know I'm in the minority here, but this series was just not for me. I didn't hate it, but when it was over, I was like, that's it. Okay. So I think what it really made me feel was disappointed. There's no like lyricism or melody to the writing. It wasn't that fanciful. It's a very concrete kind of fantasy, and I wanted it to be more whimsical. There's no whimsy. That's what it is. It's not whimsical. And maybe it's not fair to judge a book on what it's not. In fact, it's not fair to judge a book on what it's not. It is a portal fantasy. You do have an interesting premise with these kids that found themselves in other places and then were rejected by those places for various reasons, and then they desire to return to them. That's all very interesting, but I just didn't like these characters. I mean, I really do think that it's a great premise. I really do, but I didn't like it. Sorry, everyone who loves it. I know I'm in the minority, but it's just me, and my opinion doesn't mean a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. Anyway, now I'm gonna pack in earnest all those books up there, and yeah, bye for now. I'll see you again in just a second. Hi, different angle. You just saw me pull a teacup question, and I'm going to answer it about this book, The Hacienda by Isabel Canas. The question was, what would I want a prequel or a sequel to be about for this book? Let me start by saying that it took me a long time to get into this book. I just couldn't get into it. It starts so fast. It starts with action and it never really lets up. And that's just not the kind of book that I normally enjoy. But there came a point at about chapter 11 where I found myself completely invested, and I read as many pages in 1.5 hours as I had read in the previous 2 weeks. So yeah, it gets real scary. It's really scary. It takes place during the Mexican Revolution, the end of the Mexican Revolution, but it has like flashbacks and stuff, and that was a very interesting time period to set a book in. I love the author's note at the end where she says it starts with a fear of the dark. Like everything, excuse me, everything for her starts with a fear of the dark. And I really appreciated her author's note at the end where she discusses houses she's lived in and how they absorb the energy of the people who have lived in them and how those things kind of become indelible within the space. And that is definitely a little bit like what the Hacienda is about. Prequel or a sequel? Well, I don't want to talk about sequels because that might give away too many spoilers about this particular ending. Prequel, yeah, I could do a prequel. They do a lot of backwards and forwards though. Like there's a lot of sliding through time to tell this story and how we got to the point we're at. And so I do think we know quite a lot about what happens before the present day portion of this story. I think that I don't really care for a prequel or a sequel to this. I think this is perfect as it is, a moment pulled out of time. The character of Beatrice is great, and Andreas is also great. I think I might read a prequel about different characters, but laying more of the groundwork of the religious system and the witchcraft influence that the priest has in this. I found that fascinating. I don't know much about that in relation to Mexican culture, so that might be an interesting prequel or a sequel. If you enjoy horror, historical fiction, I would recommend this. I would like to reread it in a couple of years and see how I feel about it then, mostly because it took such a long time to get into it, and then I read the rest of it so very quickly. I ended on a high feeling with it, but I know like that struggle from the beginning of the read is real, and it was there. So anyway, I'll see you again in a second. Hi, another check-in, another weird perspective. You're just sitting on a bookshelf, which doesn't have books on it, and everything's being packed around me, so it's kind of nutty around here, but I did finish these 2 books. I don't know where my teacup is with teacup questions, so I'm just gonna debrief these. This I read for my city library recommendations. This I read for my county library recommendations. Both of these are duds. This one is so incredibly cynical and bitter. It's written like a romance, and it reads like a romance, and it hates romance. And I don't need for an author to love romance, but if you're going to write a romance book, have a little hope, have a little optimism, have a little softening of your perspective on romance. One wonders when reading this if the author is maybe going through something themselves, because the tone is so, I mean, the best word I can think of is bitter. So was this life affirming? Really, no. Did this restore my faith in humanity? Was it feel good? Really, no. Did it read summary? Quite ironically, yes. Yes, it does. It reads very much like a summary book. I think the goal for this was to be some sort of humorous, Austen-esque commentary, maybe social parody of romance, but it just comes across as incredibly bitter and cynical and painful to read. I would have DNF'd this if it were not part of this librarian versus librarian reading challenge. This one is whimsical. I really enjoyed the writing, and at first it was really drawing me in, this idea of an apothecary bookseller on a boat, on a barge bookstore that floats around, and the initial introduction of the characters, and it felt very Amelie-esque in its storytelling, in its whimsicalness, its whimsicality, if that's a word. But the story itself, I could not get behind, and the characters as it was unfolded, and how this is really just a story about infidelity and a person's inability to move on from something they could not have, was just really hard for me to get behind and to care about. I felt really judgmental of these characters every time I picked up the book. I just wanted them to make better choices for themselves and for others. And they just kept hurting themselves and others because they were stuck in a loop. What's that old U2 song? You got stuck in a moment and now you can't get out of it. That is what this book is about. And that moment is infidelity. And I just couldn't care about it. I really couldn't. Although the writing itself, like I said, was quite whimsical. So yeah, was it life-affirming? Maybe for some readers, not for me. Was it a good summer read? I would say the whimsicality would make this a great summer read. It felt easy to read it. I didn't dread picking it up until I started seeing what the story was actually unfolding as. Was it feel good? Maybe for some readers, but not for me. This was not a book for me. And now I know, and that's fine. It's not a book I would have DNF'd, I don't think. I did want to know what the characters would do, but it didn't, in my opinion, it didn't become redeemable in the end. So those are my very brief thoughts from a world of moving. And I will see you again in, for you, a second. Hello, I am just popping in for a moment before I start packing for today, because I have finished The Thornbirds. Did not intend to finish it today, but just couldn't stop reading it. I want to put the video on while I make some progress on packing. My hair is still wet from a shower, and the sun is out, and packing and boxes are in full swing. But I wanted to stop and say a couple of words about The Thornbirds. I'm going to do a full wrap-up video about it, answering a series of questions like I always do for Bean's Big Book Bash picks, so I won't say much here. Just know that I loved it, and it is so cringy and full of so many questionable things, but what a good read. Like, what a good read. Highly recommend if you want to suspend reality for a while. Old school romance feel. Again, very questionable, very questionable relationships and choices. Some very hateful characters, like characters that you will hate, but also some characters that you're just going to absolutely fall in love with. And I'm so curious to see how on earth they can portray some of these relationships that they have in this book. Anyway, more in my actual wrap up, but for right now, I have finished this one, and I'm gonna pack it in a box with a bunch of other stuff that I'm packing right now. I'm gonna push play on my Thornbirds DVDs, and the next time you see me, I'll have finished another book. I totally forgot to do a video wrap up of Paradise by K. Tempest, which I finished today. So I think it's in the bottom box. It's already closed up. We're just going to do the wrap up without it, with all the chaos behind me, and a dog who's desperate for attention. Wants to thank me for not packing for a moment. Paradise. So all week I've been teaching an outschool poetry writing class. So I've been packing a little in the morning, reading a little in the morning, teaching, and then packing in the afternoon, and then spending the evenings relaxing. Yesterday, I had to take about, 8 or 9 hours to pull together timelines for the 2 classes that I will no longer be teaching at my old school. So that took a lot of time and brain power and effort, and made me very grumpy, but it's done. And so today I woke up and I just wanted to read, so I picked up Paradise, which is a play by K. Tempest, and it was phenomenal, and I loved it, and it's one of my 5-star reads, and it's one of my favorite books of the year. Yeah, cannot speak highly enough about it. Totally recommend it. I wrote a little bit about it, a little summary about it on Instagram, and to be honest, that's all I'm going to say. It's hard for me to formulate my thoughts about books like this in this fragmented manner. Doing my best. Next time you see me, I'll have finished another book. It is very hot. I just got out of the shower to cool down, and my hair is almost dry within like 10 minutes, which is crazy for my hair. I've turned the fans off in this room. I did buy an air conditioner, but it didn't seem It seems like a better idea to keep it in its original packaging for the move than to unpack it for these 3 days of heat. But I don't know if I'm gonna make it one more day. We'll see. Yesterday was warm, today was warmer, tomorrow's going to be hot. I don't know. I'm a wimp now, apparently. But I have a huge stack of books here that I haven't checked in with you about yet. So I don't know. I'm not going to talk about them very long because this is already quite a long video as I edit it and piece it together. So let me just give you the rest of my pile and tell you where we stand. I read this one for my in real life book group and then didn't end up going to my in real life book group because life is too crazy right now. I think that I would love this book in a different time, in a different headspace. I liked the writing. The story I think is important, but I didn't like my experience with this book because it just wasn't what I need right now. So I will try that again. I read this one and I'm so happy that I found it. This is In Kiltumper, A Year in an Irish Garden by Niall Williams and his partner, Christine Breen. And this is about a year in their garden in Ireland. And it is just the most wonderful book. I would like next year to read this one chapter a month over the course of the entire year. It is about gardening, but it's also about writing and about relationships and about family and community. It's about a lot of things. So loved this. I read Madame Borovna, The Moon, the Stars, and Madame Borova by Ruth Hogan. And this was for the Library versus Library reads, and I absolutely loved this. This was so wonderful. It felt like I was reading an extended episode of a cozy British mystery. It is dual timeline. There's a little bit of magical realism. Full disclosure, something that I am extremely sensitive to but could handle in this book is animals in dangerous situations. And that happens a lot in this book with dogs specifically. Spoiler, nothing bad ever actually happens to the animals. I read The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin, also for the Library versus Librarian Challenge, and I loved this one. I did not understand half of what was going on for half of the book, but then it all came together, and it's so fun. It reminded me of Heroes, that TV show from the early 2000s, mostly the first season, where the people are starting to like realize who they are and what their special thing is. And then also it reminded me of The Rook, just in the way, by Daniel O'Malley, just in the way that it was humorous, but also suspenseful, very fast-paced, action-packed. You're thrown right into the middle of the problem at the very beginning. You don't know what's going on, and it kind of has to be pieced together for you. I loved this experience, and I never would have picked this up on my own, so this was a huge win. My reread for the month was Bellwether by Susanna Kersley. I just finished this one, and I absolutely loved my reread of it. I'm so glad. Since reading this, I have tried to read other Susanna Kersleys and over the years and have DNF'd every single one of them. And so I just thought, what a fluke this was. And I was afraid of my reread, to be quite honest. I saved it till quite late in the month. But as I started, like the moment that I started to reread this, I was just totally engrossed, and I stayed up so late last night in the uncomfortable heat as my apartment cooled down, finishing reading this, and it was superb. Also for the Library versus Library Challenge was this collection of short stories by Alice Munro, and I do not love short stories, but I did really enjoy this. It is not a memoir. It's not really stories that are true, but they're all kind of born out of personal memoirs she's written and not published, and true stories from her family. But all the stories and all the characters are fiction. And I enjoyed this, and I liked how they were all connected. It made it read more like a novel to me. I reread Anne of Avonlea, and I found this to be just so delightful. All through my growing up years, this was the one that I would always skip over. I would read Anne of Green Gables and then go straight to Anne of the Island. Because this one bored me when I was a kid and I read it. It's all about Anne as a teacher, her first year of teaching in Avonlea. And then 2 years ago, right when we went into lockdown, I listened to the whole Anne of Green Gables, first book to last book, and to Rilla. And I was so surprised by how much I loved listening to this book. And so I decided that I would move forward in my reading Anne of Green Gables every month push, and that I would start read Anne of Avonlea. And I loved this. I loved this so much. I relate to Anne as a teacher so much. I mean, very, very different situations, but teachers know. And yeah, I just really loved this. So that was a bright spot in the month. I am still reading my last library recommends book. This is Maeve Binchy's Minding Frankie. This is slow going for me. I have 4 days left on it. And yeah, I struggle with Maeve Binchy. I hated Light a Penny Candle, and though this is very different in tone, very different in story, very different in even the language that's being used, it almost feels like it's written by a completely different person. It is not, but it feels like it. I'm still not loving this. And I think it's just me and Maeve Binchy. I just don't enjoy this author, I don't think. The story I do like a lot more, and the characters I do like a lot more, but I still think I'm predicting this is probably going to be like a 3-star read for me. Still reading Touch Not the Cat by Mary Stewart. I will have this finished tonight or tomorrow. I am loving this book. The other Mary Stewart that I read this month, which was my first Mary Stewart ever, which was Rose Cottage, was just a so-so read for me, and I think this is going to be 5 stars. This one is creepy and spooky and atmospheric and unbelievable. It's reminding me of, although I don't think there's reincarnation happening in this book, but it is reminding me of that movie with Barbara Streisand, On a Clear Day You Can See Forever. For some reason, I'm making connections with that. It's just so much fun. I'm loving it so much, and I'm guessing it's going to be 5 stars. And then I will also finish this one in 4 days. This is When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill, and I am loving this book. I am loving this book. I am loving this book. I know a lot of people are giving it a lot of flack, but I think it is so well written, so engaging, so geared toward adults. I hear a lot of people saying that this is reading like a middle grade, and I would just challenge those people. Like, when was the last time you read a middle grade? Because this does not read like a middle grade. It's a coming of age story, so it's about, and from the voice of a child, but what's happening in this book is not middle grade material. Yeah, I'm totally enjoying this. A lot, though, will depend on how it ends, how she wraps this up. I don't know. I don't know that I trust it enough, thinking about all of those negative reviews that I've heard. So right now, I love it at like 60% of the way through, and we'll see how that goes. I want to turn the fans back on, and I want to add this to the video and get that video finished, edited, and up so that I don't have to think about it anymore. Because tomorrow, hot, might unpack and install the air conditioner in my room so that I can quote unquote chill out, pun intended, or might just suffer through tomorrow. And then I have the kitchen and the bathroom and all my craft supplies and all the artwork that's on the walls in every room in the house to pack. And so I'm really pushing it to the wire. This happened last year too, although it's not, thank goodness, it's not as hot as last year. But last year my move fell right close to those terrible, terrible days as well. And I lost like a week of packing last year because of the heat. That won't happen this year. It's not quite as hot. Also, I'll just set up the air conditioner if I absolutely have to. But yeah, I'm gonna turn the fans back on, get cool, edit this in, get that video live, and call June a wrap. Oh, who won? Who won, my city or my county? I'm gonna post those results. I'm gonna post those results on Instagram. You can find the link in my link tree because I haven't finished reading Minding Frankie yet. So, sorry, but that's how it's gonna be. That's just how it is. Anyway, let's go read and find somewhere to be cool. May you be cool wherever you are. Bye.